Well, greetings, neighbors, both near and far. On behalf of our pastoral team and our Westover Church family, we're so grateful you're taking a few minutes to join us in this midweek through Mark as we are journeying through the Gospel of Mark together. Today, we move into chapter 3, and this is the final event in a series of events known as the Five Confrontations. We're going back to Mark chapter 2. Jesus is confronting the religious leaders of the day. And so to kind of paint the picture of where we are as we enter into Mark chapter 3, Jesus goes into the synagogue. This would have been the place of worship, and he does so on the Jewish Sabbath, which would have been somewhere between Friday sundown and Saturday sundown. And we're told that there was a man who was there with a withered hand. And in the very next verse, it says, and they watched Jesus. They were watching Jesus. You have to understand that at this point, Jesus was under heavy suspicion. At the beginning of Mark 2, Jesus claimed to have the ability and the power to forgive sins, something that would only be reserved for God. And then he was accused for hanging out with seemingly the wrong people, the outcasts, the people who were furthest from God. And then he begins to challenge and to confront these man-made traditions, these heavy burdens that were being weighed on people's shoulders for things that they felt like they had to do in order to earn favor with God. And then Jesus begins to encroach on one of the most sacred traditions, the observance of Sabbath, which we see at the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. And so it says in verse 2, and they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal this man on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. They were looking for Jesus to do something wrong. Jesus was sort of under the watchful eye of the hawk at this point. And the moment that Jesus did something wrong, this would justify these leaders to eliminate this disruptive figure. Have you ever felt like sometimes God is waiting for you to do something wrong? He's waiting for you to mess up so that he can accuse you and pounce on you and condemn you? Or maybe for some, we feel like God is more concerned about the things that we do wrong than the things that we actually do right, or the things that we shouldn't do as opposed to the things that we should. Well, what Jesus is doing is he's coming to confront these false perceptions of who God is. He's going to expose the hearts of these leaders who are misrepresenting who God is and what God is about. So watch how he does this. Verse 3 says, and he said to the man with the withered hand, come here. And he said to them, and he has this guy stand up in front of the crowd, in front of the Pharisees, and he asked them a question. He said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill? You see, what Jesus is essentially asking is, what's more important, your principles or people? And you see, we talked about this last weekend, that when our traditions become more sacred than helping people, we're missing the heart of God. And the whole idea of the Sabbath was not just to be a day of rest, but it was an opportunity to do good. And so Jesus asked this question, and it says immediately after, but they were silent. The religious leaders were silent. They had nothing to say. They were indifferent. And in verse 5, it says, and he, Jesus, looked at them with anger, grieved at the hardness of their heart. You see that the hearts of the Pharisees were more withered than this man's hand. We're told that this angered Jesus. Jesus was filled with indignation. He was troubled in spirit. You want to know what makes Jesus angry? Is anything that will stand in between your good and God's heart. Jesus will go after those things. And it says he was grieved and troubled in spirit. And as a result of that, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Verse 6 is a sad turn in the story. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him on how to destroy him. You see, the hearts of the Pharisees and the religious leaders had become so hard and jaded and wayward that they were convinced that it was actually wrong to do good on the Sabbath, like heal someone, but it was somehow right to plot murder. Things had gotten wayward. Things had gotten wrong. Well, as we keep reading, and just to summarize verses 7 through 12, Jesus moves on, and it says these crowds began to follow him. Great crowds were following him. People were pressing in just to get close to Jesus so that they might touch him and experience healing. You see, that's who God is. God is not a God who is ready to accuse, a God who is angry, or a God who is disappointed with you, but a God who comes near, a God who presses in with his grace, a God who desires to see us transformed from the inside out, to take our hearts of stone and to replace them with a heart of flesh, says Ezekiel 36. That's the heart of God. And so may you know today that God is near. May you know that today that God is not a God who is disappointed, a God who is angry, a God who is ready to accuse, or a God who is ready to condemn. But may you know that this God has moved heaven and earth by sending his one and only Son, Jesus, so that through your faith in him and my faith in him, we might experience transformation and restoration in our lives, and that we might know beyond any shadow of a doubt that God delights in us and he sings over us through his grace. Hey, we'd love for you to take this video and maybe share it, like it. And of course, we would love for you to join us this Sunday, 10:30 at Westover Church, 505 Mears Chapel Road, as we continue our journey through the Gospel of Mark.